Yes. That is Elizabeth Swift, I believe, on the left, and Catherine Cove just behind her, coming off, two of them wearing their yellow ribbons, holding hands, these two women who've come so very close in captivity.
There's Jerry Plotkin and
Jerry Plotkin. Bill Quarles, please join in.
William Belkey in the red jacket behind.
William Belkey in the red jacket behind.
And Steve Lauterbach behind him.
Steve Lauterbach just behind him.
Yeah,
Elizabeth Swift in the foreground of the picture. Look at the smile on her face.
Charles Jones, now Vice Consul in the U.S. Consulate in Vancouver. Were you on that very plane?
I was on that very plane.
How do you feel this morning sitting looking after you? How many days were you in custody?
444 days, actually, 14 and a half months.
How did you feel coming back on that plane a couple of years ago today?
That's, you know, the feeling when we were released was just so tremendous that it's hard to describe, even today.
It's kind of hard to believe it ever happened at all.
I was just telling Jack that, you know, he says, well, what were your exact feelings at that time? And the only thing I can say is that after such a long time of incarceration, it was just relief, of course. Mm-hmm. And I guess the big thing was, you know, to be reunited with my family.
Kind of born again, you might say.
Oh, Mr. Carter.
Yeah. How bad was the 444 days? And I don't want to go into all the gruesome detail, but has it left a mark on you, Charles?
Well, it's made me more tolerant towards other people's opinions. Mm-hmm. A lot more tolerant, because those people were so inflexible. I mean, you know, Khomeini was the greatest thing that ever hit the earth, reincarnation of Mohammed, and it was just to say how I feel about it, or, you know, the changes.
Yeah. Gosh, I remember, you know, being in custody at the time must have been dreadful, because some of the hostages signed a petition to the Shah, didn't they, asking them to extradite them?
Well, let me tell you about that. They came around and they said, look, if you sign this, there's a good possibility that you might be released early. I refused to sign it. After about, I don't know, half the people that signed it, they came around and they said, okay, look, everybody's signing this. It really doesn't mean anything. Will you sign it? So I agreed to sign it at that time, but I refused for about a week to sign it.
I don't think it could have mattered less whether you signed it or not. I don't know what what I would do in the same thing. I'd probably sign it forthwith first time round.
No, well, the way it was written, it wasn't anything controversial.
Tell me, were you aware at the time of the helicopter rescue attempt when you were in custody?
No, we were not aware of it. The night, April 1980, I was in the embassy at the time, in the basement, and I had a friend, Rich Queen, who spoke Farsi. And they had a radio outside of the office that we were quartered in, and he could understand what they were talking about. But we didn't know it was a rescue attempt. What they were talking about was releasing us, because they were frightened to death.
They were, really?
They were actually frightened. They said, what do you want to do? You want all of us to be killed? Let them go. Let the Americans go.
This was some of the people in the office, some of the guards?
This was some of the guards outside of our windows talking Farsi.
So the attitude wasn't quite as solid as we were led to believe among Khomeini's people at that particular time?
Oh, gosh, no. They had a few militants that were really, you know, like in any situation, you have some people pushing and some followers.
Yeah.
And the militants, because they were more vocal, I guess, you know, their opinions carried.
Jack, you were a spokesman for the State Department at the time. Where were you that day?
Well, you know, as Charles and I were talking this morning, Jack, and even to those of us who were negotiating, trying to get these people out, it seems today to almost have been a dream. But on that very day, I was at that Air Force base we've just seen, Ramstein in Germany, in the what's called the hot alert room, with one hand on a phone to the State Department Operations Center in Washington, and the other phone was held by Warren Christopher, who was our negotiator in Algiers, if you remember, who was in turn talking to what passes for the leadership of Iran and Tehran.
So therefore, here it was going between Tehran, Algiers, Wiesbaden, Washington D.C.
Right.
Because it was kept fairly secret. Was it kept secret where the hostages were going when they were released?
Yes, it was kept, well, It was kept very, very secret, except for the fact that it was pretty well known that the only place we did not want to bring the hostages directly back to the United States, because we wanted to come to a place where they had excellent hospital facilities in Europe where they could in effect be reoriented. We didn't know what kind of psychological trauma or what kind of health they were really in. So we wanted to have, in effect, some sort of neutral ground before they came back to the United States. We had psychiatrists and physicians who were going to be treating them, and so while it was kept very, very secret, I had 3,000 press waiting outside the gates.
How the devil do you handle 3,000 jackals?
Badly. No, I think the press handled the whole release thing extremely well. I informed them in news conferences that we would have no direct news conferences with the hostages because of the physical condition or mental condition that they might be in. That was completely respected. And when you have that many press, I think it was the largest covered event of its kind ever in history.
No doubt about it, because it was followed all the way from Algiers, from the landing in Algiers, was the first live television coverage,
Exactly.
and then to Wiesbaden.
Right.
Now, when you look at the overall effect, and how many hostages were there? 62?
52.
52 hostages. My glasses don't work anymore. 52 hostages. Has everyone recovered back to total normal, or did anyone really have serious after effects of these 444 days of horror?
Well, I think one of the things that the doctors in Wiesbaden and then back in the United States noted was that it was amazing that for the terrible conditions they lived in and some of the traumas that they received, that after an initial period in which some people were pretty badly affected, they seemed to recover on the whole, and I'll ask Charles about this, I think very well indeed. Is that right, Charles?
Charles?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I think I've put it behind me, let's put it that way. That was just another Foreign Service tour.
Yeah, well, I must admit,
Quite a tour.
Vancouver must remind you of Tehran because it is so different.
It's so different. I tell you, I love this place. I really love Vancouver.
More with Charles Jones and Jack Cannon. Do you mind if we take calls?
Oh, go ahead.
No, gosh, no.
What about current policy in Iran? What's the position between the United States and Iran at the moment?
Well, I have to hasten to state here that after the release of the hostages, I was no longer materially involved in U.S.-Iranian affairs, or in effect the lack of them. But it is my understanding that the situation outside of the carrying out of the agreement to unfreeze Iranian assets and to finalize the agreement on the economic agreement we made in order to get the hostages out.
Right.
We virtually have no direct relations with Iran at all.
More with Charles Jones and Jack Cannon, and perhaps some calls from you this morning after the break. Got a couple of pictures here I want to show you, see if it brings back nostalgia. The first one is, that's Reagan and Charlie Jones. And the next one is Charlie Jones and President Carter. How come you met both presidents? I've forgotten the details of that scurrying around. Who recalls it?
Well, first of all, if you recall, the amazing irony was that the release of the hostages, the announcement that they were being released, occurred almost at the same minute, and perhaps for materially important reasons, that President Reagan was being inaugurated on January the 20th. Some people think that there's quite a link there.
I don't know whose link it was, whether it was Reagan's link or the Iranian timing.
Well, I think that there's even though we could never prove it, pretty much of a consensus that the Iranians very much wanted to have this matter behind them by the time the new president came into
And then how
office.
did Carter get into the act?
Well, he decided to come to Wiesbaden to meet with the hostages and to, you recall, it was a very, very emotional time, and he more or less, the outgoing president, devoted the last 2 months, certainly, of his presidency almost exclusively to trying to get these people released, and so it was a natural thing for him to come to these.
Now, I know you're not a State Department spokesman, and you can duck this if you like, but you used to be a newspaper man and a television man, right?
Right.
So let's forget all that State Department jazz for the moment.
No comment.
You got me right away. I often wondered how close it came to an all-out bash.
Well, in the
Is that a
Carter...
fair question, Charles? A fair one to ask him.
Well, it can be answered.
Sure.
In the first moments after the seizure, I think if there was any chance that it would have come to, if what you're talking about is direct U.S. military action in Iran,
Right.
the answer is, and this is a personal, not an official reflection, I think it came very close to that. The question was whether or not a series of steps that might be employed to increase the pressure on the Iranians over the matter of 2 or 3 days, with perhaps a major ultimatum at the end. There is no question that these matters were considered at the very beginning. They were not employed, but that was a matter for the president.
Yeah, I think everybody in the West was very upset when the helicopter rescue didn't work, eh?
Yes, well...
That was largely bad luck, as I recall.
Well, it was at least partially bad luck.
Yeah. Now, Charles, I've got a problem with my diet. How could I lose weight quickly?
Well, I'll tell you what, I lost 27 pounds during my incarceration, and some people lost even more. A friend of Jack's lost something like, well, 100 pounds.
Would you get Farsi food? Were you given the local food to eat?
Let me explain that. We had something like 40,000 people in Tehran at one time, and therefore we had a very large commissary. We had a few commissaries there.
You mean the U.S. had 40,000 people?
The U.S. had 40,000 people training the Shah's army and et cetera, aid missions in it. So we had a few PXs and commissaries. Well, we convinced the Iranians that we just could not live on their fare. So they raided the commissaries, and so we were fed American foods to start with. Of course, that didn't last that long.
No.
And they were very stingy with it also.
But by and large, were you ever yourself maltreated when you were in custody? When you were a hostage?
I was interrogated 5 times. The first
Because you were
week,
the communications officer.
yes, I was in charge of the communications section there. And the first day I was beaten, no scars. But after that, they stopped.
It cooled. Well, looking back on it now, I suppose it was one of those things from which the Western world learned a few lessons about. But would more security in Iran have done any good at all? You can't keep an army around an embassy, whatever you are, can you?
No, I don't think that. I don't think any amount of security would have, assuming you're in a country as large as Iran. The only question, of course, was whether or not the embassy should have been closed before it was assaulted.
Okay, well, some calls now to Charles Jones, Vice Consul, U.S., about the Tehran issue, not your problems about immigration or border crossing, and Jack Cannon after the break. A couple of things I want to check with you, Charles, and with you, Jack. One, early in the occupation or the hostage taking, didn't they make an offer that all black members could go?
Yes.
What happened in that? Tell me. You refused to go. That much I remember.
I don't know where that story got started. I did not refuse to go because I didn't know anything about it.
Oh.
I knew absolutely nothing about it. They were under the mistaken impression that I was some sort of secret agent or something like that, and so I wasn't released. I didn't find out that the other blacks and the women had been released, and actually till after Christmas, 1979.
That was when you was 1980.
No,
1981.
1979, because it was
1979.
444 days they were
Yeah, I
held.
can never get these damn dates right. But then at that particular time, they accused you. They thought you were some kind of CIA man.
Well, that's what they thought.
Well,
yes.
being in communications, it wasn't an unreasonable thought, I don't suppose. But you weren't, as it happens, you tell me.
Been with the State Department for almost 18 years.
Good. What happened when you met Carter? Did you really want to meet Carter when he came over to East Baden?
No, we didn't. We still had some hostilities, okay? So he took a vote, and Mr. Carter decided to come anyway. Well, when he arrived, we did see him. He walked in and he started shaking hands. He took one look at me and he walked up and just threw his arms around me and embraced me. I mean, it was nice to gesture, but he was just, he was a good person.
Yeah,
Mr. Carter is basically a good man.
That particular time it was difficult to handle, eh? Tell me, Ramsey Clark comes back to me. Ramsey Clark. Now, he didn't go over there to negotiate as an official agent of the U.S. government, did he?
No, there were several...
Former Attorney General.
Yes, former Attorney General Clark was one of a number of different people who made separate informal, some clerics as well, made separate entreaties and attempts. We, as a government, were opposed to any kind of private entreaties because we were having a terribly difficult time negotiating with what we considered to be a single voice. What we felt was not there was a single voice in Iran. So we wanted to at least talk with a single voice in Washington.
Some phone calls. Go ahead from Whistler.
Good morning. Welcome aboard, gentlemen. One comment I'd like to make regarding Mr. Webster's question about what would have happened with the whole situation have blown up. I'd like to know your guest comments on, well, this is an assumption, but let's say that it was Reagan rather than Carter who was the president on that situation. And the other thing is Mr. Jones states that he's put this behind him, the experience. It seems to me that there were a number of prisoners who instituted legal action against the government. Is that still an ongoing thing, or have they put it behind them? Thanks very much.
I'll take the first part of that. I don't think that you can assume or project what might have happened when it didn't in fact happen. So we really don't know what would have happened had Mr. Reagan been the president when the hostages were taken. However, there is one very important thing, and that is that there is a great body of opinion that the reason why the Iranians chose to release the hostages at the time Mr. Reagan was inaugurated was the fear of what might come afterward and immediately after his inauguration if they refused to do so.
Good answer. What about this business of some of the hostages taking action?
Well, I'm part of that. And we're not suing the U.S. government. We are suing the Iranian government. The right to sue was taken away under the hostage agreement between the United States and Iran. What we're trying to do is get that overturned. And I think that this is a perfectly legitimate right or whatever, because we did lose 14 and a half months of our lives.
That's right.
And I think that we should be compensated for that.
And that action is still going ahead, presumably, to the Supreme Court of the United States eventually.
It's gone to the Supreme Court, and we have it on appeal.
That's very good. Good questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a question for Charles.
Right.
Were you aware that Ken Taylor and his crew smuggled out some of the other Americans?
We found that out through the grapevine. We knew, by the way, that 6 people had not been captured. There are various ways. You look at some movies on television and you see all sort of things in POW camps and et cetera. Well, believe me, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we found various ways to communicate. One thing you have to remember, from our capture of the 4th of November 1979 until March 17th, 1980, we were not allowed to talk to each other.
Absolutely.
We were not allowed, no. If I wanted to talk to someone, well, I couldn't talk to another hostage. I could talk to a guard and let it be made known to the guard what I wanted. Mm-hmm. Well, we found out through various means that the 6 had not been captured, and later we found out that they had been smuggled back to the United States.
Golly, good show.
I just want to add a postscript about Ambassador Taylor and his Canadian embassy colleagues in Tehran. When the matter unfolded and the Canadians got the Americans out, I think it was the feeling of everyone negotiating the hostages' release that this was the most courageous and heroic act that we as a group of people had seen in recent history.
Yeah, where is Taylor now?
He's in New York.
Oh, yes.
Consul General.
Consul General. Go ahead, please.
Hi there.
Hi.
I have a question for Charles and a comment to you, Jack.
Uh-huh.
Okay. First of all, for Charles, I was wondering, is there any racial discrimination at all between hostages, do you feel, in Iran? Did they treat the black people any different than the white people, first of all?
Are you talking about the Iranians?
The
sir?
Iranians
Yeah, the
themselves.
Iranian treatment of.
Well, after they released all the blacks and the 5 women, we were all treated the same. The 2 women who were officers of the U.S. government, they were treated just like any other hostage, and of course I was treated just like any other.
There was no distinction then between white
Racial
hostages and
no,
black.
No.
none whatsoever.
Okay.
And a comment for you, Jack.
Uh-huh.
Are you using a little Grecian formula these days?
It's an Irish formula.
Just
It's
a
an
moment.
Irish formula.
Just a minute. That is natural gray. I don't use Grecian formula. It's my-
Jack, we know that was a little whiter last month.
I had my hair cut, you think.
Okay, Jack.
Bye. Go ahead. Don't go ahead. We'll do another segment of calls after the break. Charles Jones, Vice Consul, U.S. Consulate in Vancouver, one of the hostages in Iran, these many years ago, and Jack Cannon. Now, tell me, how long will you stay in Vancouver?
2 years. 2-year assignment. It ends in September of '83.
Don't know where you'll go.
Not yet.
Many wars you've been involved in?
Well, Iran was the 3rd situation like that for me.
Saigon?
I was in Saigon in April of '75 when it fell to the communists, and I was in Egypt in 1967 when during the 6-Day War.
See, we all think that diplomatic jobs or jobs with embassies overseas are entirely cocktail parties and hors d'oeuvres. We wish it were the truth, even though there are a fair amount of them. Go ahead, please. Hello.
Gentlemen,
Yes.
good morning.
Morning.
I wonder if you know that last fall on a TV talk show, Mr. Carter was being interviewed regarding this new book that he has written. And he intimated at that time that because of the fact that he was making negotiations with Iran to release the hostages and nothing was happening, he made the threat to them that if one hostage was harmed, the United States would have no alternative but to use military action. And regardless of whether you think Mr. Reagan was the one who might have triggered it, I do believe that was probably what happened, that the Iranians released the hostages because of the threat of military action.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to that, Jack?
Well, first of all, at my level, that was not known, number one. Number two is Mr. Carter had private means of communication through the Algerians that were very private indeed.
Very secret.
I believe this will all come out in his book.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. When the final assault was going on the embassy, of course, documents were being destroyed as rapidly as possible. But at that point, or any point during your term as a hostage, was there ever any backup plan for, suicide or killing yourselves in the event of being tortured for certain state secrets? Thank you. I'll hang up now.
This is a guy who's been watching The Spy Who Came In
Right.
From the Cold.
James Bond is sort of passé. No, there was absolutely no. We're diplomats, not spies.
Good answer. Go ahead, please. Hello. Where are you? Come on. Go ahead, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I have one question for the gentleman that I was kind of worried about. If the Americans would have used military intervention, was there any chance of, say, a nuclear war because of Russian attitudes at that time?
Well,
I think if you recall the time, the Russians maintained an extremely low profile during the entire scene, from the time the hostages were seized all the way through to the end. I think that they had enough on their plate without getting overly involved.
Yeah, that's the part that kind of made me nervous, was the low profile they were keeping, actually. And I also wonder if that might have played heavy on other people's minds, too, why that type of intervention wasn't used.
Okay, bye. Thank you very much. Go ahead from the NIMO.
Hello there, how are you?
Fine.
Good. I just want to make one question here. Before this thing happened, there were enough intelligent people were in USA
to know what was going to happen. Well, British government just got cleared in the Falklands. How did the U.S. government come out on the hostage taking, if there was a public an inquiry after that, Charles?
As far as I know, there has not been a public inquiry.
Of any kind?
Of any kind.
So you don't know?
No.
No.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hello. I've got a couple of comments about whether or not the hostages would have been taken if Reagan were president. I think the fact that they were released so promptly when he was inaugurated sort of indicates that the Iranians wouldn't have messed with him. Also, Jimmy Carter was so closely associated with the Shah of Iran. I remember seeing one New Year's Eve where Carter and his wife spent it with the Shah and his wife, and it made big publicity and all that.
I remember that.
Yes.
I remember that. What do you say to that, Jack?
Well, again, as I said before, there is no way of knowing what would have happened had Mr. Reagan been president. I mean, that's an assumption that you just can't make. It wasn't on the table. We don't.
I agree. You can't make that assumption, but it's you can draw certain indications from behaviors past and present. Also, I think that the hostages were the primary reason why Jimmy Carter didn't get reelected. If he'd have had any political savvy at all, if he'd have been a Lyndon Johnson type, the hostages would have been in Iranian hands for under a week.
Well, as I said before, I think it was the pressure, the implicit pressure on the Iranian leadership's mind that if Mr. Reagan were to become president, they might have a lot of trouble.
I think we've hashed that over enough. Go ahead from Penticton.
Hello, Jack and friends.
Yeah.
I'm an ex-Marine that fought in the Vietnam War and served under 3 presidents. And I really and truly believe in what took place over in Iran. And the only thing that bothered a lot of the vets was the type of treatment that they received coming home in regards to the type of treatment we received coming home.
What do you mean?
Prisoners of war and
That they weren't
fighting in
treated
I Corps.
with Vietnam veterans.
And we all felt, or the majority of us, I should say, felt that anybody who takes an overseas position should come under the Military Act, and because they realize what they're getting themselves into.
Okay, I want to see what Charles Jones has to say to that. Charlie?
What you're saying is the difference between the treatment of the people that, came back from Vietnam and the treatment of the hostages. When you join the military, it's something altogether different than from a civilian outfit like the State Department. We are not fighters. You went overseas, you went to Vietnam. By the way, I spent a considerable amount of time in I Corps. But you went overseas to fight. That was your job. We are the arm of the president. We're the ears of the president. We are not soldiers. And it's something altogether different. The reason why we did not ask for that outpouring of love, gratitude, or whatever from the American people, from the people of the world. This was a spontaneous thing. We appreciate it. But I don't think you can put the two in the same context.
Well, fair enough. How long have you been in Canada, Marine?
Well, I've only been back here since December for the simple reason I served 16 years with the United States government as a very high dignitary, received a pension. Our present president decided to take it away from me last April and basically bankrupt me, and I'm medically disabled, and I had to come back to Canada for medicine.
You are a Canadian citizen?
Yes, I am. I asked for my commission back in the service, and they refused me because I was not healthy enough.
So you served your time in the U.S. Army but didn't become an American citizen?
No, I didn't.
You didn't. Anyway, you have my sympathy, sir. Give me a call sometime, and thanks for your phone. We're going to leave it there. Jack Cannon, it's been a delight this morning. You too, Charles Jones. It's good to remember about these things and hope they never happen again. Next, the man from Apple, after the break.